can be seated. We're back on the record in 1432. Mr. Jones does appear in custody. He's represented by Ms. Smith and Mr. Colvin. Mr. Rubenstein and Mr. Wade are both here for the people. We're outside the presence of our jury. Anything before I invite our jury in? Mr. Rubenstein?
No, sir.
Mr. Colvin?
We have nothing to do.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and call for him then. Rise for our jury. Thank you. Please be seated. For the record, our jury has joined us back in the court. Welcome back, everybody. You can continue with your cross-examination whenever you're ready, Ms. Smith. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Sergeant Wiler, when we left off, we were just talking a little bit about your discussion with Mr. Jones about his marriage and his use of prostitutes, right?
Yes.
Remember? Okay. And Mr. Jones talks to you a little bit about the problems that uncovering his use of prostitutes is causing in his marriage.
Yes,
And he told you that he had disclosed everything to his wife, Elaine.
he did.
And he had told you that he had disclosed essentially what he was telling you to his wife.
That is correct.
So he tells you in this interrogation about more prostitutes and more prostitute use than he had disclosed to Investigator Norcross.
That is correct.
And so he is appearing to be disclosing gradually, one might say, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's true.
And even within your time with him, he first tells you he used one other service besides Models Inc., right? In the beginning, do you remember that?
I think he started off with one, yes.
Okay, and then he talks about there being other girls in the past.
We actually had to draw it out of him, but yes.
Okay. Okay, so once you draw it out of him, he talks about more girls in the past.
Yes,
And then you draw out of him that there's been 5 girls total over 3 years.
yes, ma'am.
And your investigation actually uncovered the use of more than 5 escorts or prostitutes.
It did.
So even though you got more out of him in this regard than Investigator Norcross, he's even minimizing it with you.
Yes,
You even though you and Mr. Jones talk about what he's told his wife about this and the impact it's having it on his marriage, you don't actually know during this interrogation what Mrs. Jones knew about Mr. Jones's use of prostitutes.
I did not know.
You don't know if she knew what you were learning,
I did not know, no.
if she knew less than what you were learning,
That's correct, I did not know.
or more than you were learning.
I did not know.
Now, the investigation uncovers that Mr. Jones used the track phone to call Models Inc., right?
Yes,
And he remains firm that he didn't buy that phone when he's talking to you, right?
firm would be a light word, yes. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Firm would be a light word, he was adamant.
Oh, adamant, okay. And to your knowledge, he had not disclosed this track phone to his wife.
My knowledge, I don't know.
You don't know if he did or not?
I don't know.
Okay. And you don't know, now, when you had interrogated Mr. Jones on the 18th of July, Mrs. Jones had been interviewed twice, right?
I know of once, I'm not sure if there was a second time.
But at any rate, you didn't conduct those interviews with her, right?
I did not know.
Okay. So you don't know what kind of havoc it would have wreaked on their marriage if Mrs. Jones found out about a secret track phone.
No, I don't know.
And you weren't aware that their marriage had previously almost fallen apart over Mr. Jones calling prostitutes.
At July 18th, had I known that?
Yeah.
I did not know that then.
And similarly, July 18th, during this interrogation, you don't know that Mrs. Jones had previously found out about the use of prostitutes through phone records.
As of July 18th, I didn't know that.
Okay. Now, you asked Mr. Jones a lot about several different things that investigators found in his work area and toolbox at Bob Scott, right?
I did.
Like the black bra,
Yes, ma'am.
the list of women,
Yes, ma'am.
the earrings,
Yes.
but you never asked him about the scale.
I didn't, no.
Okay, so you never provided him with an opportunity to explain to you about the scale.
I did. I talked about his locker that was upstairs, which technically was downstairs, so I did provide an opportunity, but he did not talk about it.
Okay. So you gave him an opportunity to talk about a locker he had upstairs?
Right, I was under the impression, I don't know why at that point, but that he had a locked locker and it was upstairs, but it turned out to be downstairs, and that's where I knew the Pampered Chef scale was at.
Okay, so in this interrogation, you're talking to him about upstairs?
Correct.
And you think that provides him with the opportunity to talk about what's in a cabinet that's downstairs?
I was incorrect, I was wrong.
Okay, because you were confused about whether the cabinet was upstairs or downstairs, and you're talking to him about upstairs. He didn't talk about anything he had upstairs.
That is correct.
Okay, because he doesn't keep anything upstairs.
I don't know whether he does or not, but the Pampered Chef was not upstairs.
And so you would agree that despite in your mind that you were trying to get at this scale, because you didn't have your facts straight, you weren't communicating to him well about the scale.
Correct.
Now, towards the end of the interrogation, you talked to Mr. Jones about how the sheriff's office will find Mrs. Bergfeld, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Somehow, somewhere,
Yes, ma'am.
that she'll get dug up.
I did not say that. No, I said the animals would dig her up.
Your Honor, may I have permission to publish the exact quote since the statement is in evidence? Publish it from the transcript, so publish the words, the written words.
Well, maybe if you'll show Mr. Waite what you're planning to publish,
Sure.
and then he'll tell me if he has an objection. Thank you.
Good idea.
Judge, I'm not objecting to that.
No objection? All right, thank you. You can proceed, Ms. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I apologize that Commissioner Cummings.
Yes, thank you.
So Sergeant Weiler, pretty soon this, the quote that I want to talk to you about will appear on that screen.
Is this from the video or from testimony?
It's from the video, and just also for counsel's benefit, it's from page 2655 of discovery. Okay, Sergeant Weiler, so that's what you tell Mr. Jones at the end of this interrogation, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So that whether the animals take a bone, she's dug up.
That is part of it, yes.
Well, why don't you, Sergeant Weiler, read that, what you say verbatim?
Sure. And she can't tell us anymore, she cannot tell us, and we will find her somewhere, somehow, we will find her. Whether the animals take a bone, she's dug up, whatever comes apart, wherever she's at, we will find her. Animals dig up graves, and they bring the bones, and we have DNA, and we will find her.
Okay. So when you state this to Mr. Jones, you would agree that you're essentially insinuating that she's buried, right?
No, I'm making a statement that based on, we didn't know at that point, so this
Right.
could have been one of the alternatives.
Okay, sure. You don't know how she's going to be recovered, right?
Correct, we don't.
Okay. And I understand, Sergeant Weiler, that at this point in time, you're not a soothsayer, right? You don't know what's gonna happen.
Correct.
Okay. But my question is that when you are talking to Mr. Jones, this is the statement you make to him on July 18th of 2007.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And by talking to him about animals digging up graves that she's dug up, that insinuates that she's buried.
I guess somebody could take it that way, yes.
Okay. Well, what do you dig up that's not buried?
Again, this is one option that can be. So I don't know, I'm just making random statements at this point.
Okay. Well, when you got a lot of different search warrants in this case, right?
I did, yes.
And when you make statements in a search warrant, you're not just making random statements, right?
You're correct.
Okay, you're being very careful and deliberate about what you include in those warrants.
Making summarized statements, yes.
Okay. And those summarized statements you make carefully and deliberately,
Yes, ma'am.
because those statements go to a judge to sign off on,
Yes, ma'am.
to give you the power to search somebody's property.
Yes, ma'am.
And those documents are so important that they're actually done under the pains and penalties of perjury.
Yes, ma'am.
And in a warrant that you got for Mr. Jones, you actually said, quote, even if he buried the you wrote to the judge that you told Mr. Jones, quote, even if he buried the body, the animals would dig it up and someone would come across the bones.
I don't believe the quote was to the judge, but that's what the statement I made.
Why don't you think it was to a judge?
I don't believe I had quotation marks on that, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. What I was quoting was your statement.
My summarization, yes.
Okay. So in your summarization to a judge, under the pains and penalties of perjury, you tell the judge that you told Mr. Jones that even if he buried the body, the animals would dig it up.
Correct, I did make
Okay.
that statement.
And what you were referring to was this statement here.
Yes,
You would agree, at least when you're swearing an affidavit to the judge, that you told Mr. Jones that he buried a body.
no, I did not tell him that he buried a body.
You did not tell who?
Mr. Jones.
Okay, then why did you tell a judge that you told Mr. Jones he buried a body?
I believe that was in a GPS affidavit that we were writing, trying to get GPS.
Right.
And that these statements were made,
Okay,
generalized.
okay. And in this generalized statement, you used the word buried.
Yes, I did.
So, since your summarization of this conversation in a application for a search warrant uses the word buried, when Mr. Jones uses the word buried to summarize this conversation, you two are on the same page, right?
Mr. Jones made that statement?
If he did.
Guess I'm not understanding the
Okay,
question.
I'll try again, Sergeant, I'm sorry. So when you wrote this affidavit to the judge, you're summarizing this conversation, right?
Yes, ma'am,
And you, in your summary, you use the word buried.
I do.
Okay. Now, when Mr. Jones summarizes this conversation, he uses the word buried, that would indicate that you two use the same word, right?
Judge, that's pure speculation as to what Mr. Jones may or may not have thought.
The objection's overruled. She's not asking what Mr. Jones thought. She's asking for the witness's analysis of the use of the word buried. So the objection's overruled.
Thank you. Yes, Sergeant, that's what I'm asking you, is that just to make sure I'm clear that when you reference this conversation in a summarization, you use the word buried too.
I did use the word buried.
Okay. And so if Mr. Jones was to summarize the conversation using the same words, the same word buried, you and Mr. Jones would have the same would have used the same word in your summarization, right?
The GPS affidavit written months after this statement, so could he have surmised buried? Yes.
Okay.
I can't tell you what he would have thought.
Sure, and I'm not asking you to do that. But that's how you summarized this a few months later when you had to write that GPS affidavit.
That is.
Now, you recognize that Mr. Jones was under a lot of stress, right? Even as early as July 18th?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And the two of you can be heard talking in the hall, right? Before you get into the room, and you say lots of stress, huh?
I probably did. I don't remember that part.
Okay. And the reason that you acknowledge that there's a lot of stress going on is because you knew, even though you were on vacation as the supervisor, the extent of investigation into Mr. Jones over the last 2 weeks.
Yes, I knew the extent of the investigation over numerous people. Yes,
Over what?
numerous people.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm focused right now, I know I've talked about Mr. Corluzzo before, but right now I'm focused on Mr. Jones, okay? So you knew that Mr. Jones' house was searched,
I did?
and that the investigators were currently searching his house again.
Yes, ma'am.
So while he's in these two different interrogations, his house is simultaneously being searched while he's being interrogated?
Yes,
And the investigators searched his camper, right?
yes,
Now, you even indicate to him in the interrogation that his house had been ransacked, right?
I did.
And they took his truck,
We took his truck and Impala.
okay, and his wife's Camry.
Yes,
That obviously causes transportation difficulties.
It does.
There were lots of search warrants.
There were, yes.
I know you don't know how many times, but they'd interviewed Mrs. Jones,
Yes,
telling her about her husband's infidelities.
yes,
They seize his clothing in the course of one interrogation.
yes,
And you understand that all of this can cause a lot of pressure.
it can, yes.
Now, part of your job as a skilled investigator is at times to purposely increase the pressure, right?
That is sometimes what we do, yes.
Okay. And the purpose of increasing the pressure is to see if the person will crack under it.
See what the reactions will be.
See
May
what-
not be cracked, but whatever the reactions might be.
Okay. And see if one of those reactions gives you a break in the case.
Yes,
You tell it, Mr. Jones, in the interrogation that he's a person of interest. Do you remember doing that?
I do, yes,
And you indicate to him that he's one of many.
yes.
But actually, that isn't entirely accurate, right?
No, it was accurate.
It was accurate. But on July 18th, when you interrogated him, he wasn't just a person of interest, he was your prime suspect.
Yes,
And you had named him as your prime suspect on July 9th in a letter to CBI requesting expedited forensic processing.
I did, yes.
And that was the day that you got back from vacation.
It was,
You wrote the letter, named him as a prime suspect, and shipped it off to CBI.
yes.
I want to just get a little bit of clarity on, I know we've talked about it before, but when this case came down, you were on vacation, right?
I was
You got back July 9th,
7th, but I back to work on that
Oh,
Monday.
okay. And Sergeant Smith was the acting sergeant on the case while you were gone.
He was, yes.
Okay, but then you didn't take it over immediately when you got back?
No, and we've tried to figure it out. I think it was 6 to 8 weeks later. Although heavily involved, I didn't actually take over supervision of it.
Okay, so 6 to 8 weeks after you get back from vacation, you're back and you're involved, but Sergeant Smith is still the lead commander, the lead supervisor on it.
Correct. And I may be off on those 6 to 8
Sure,
weeks.
approximation. Now, at this point, but at this point, you are Ms. Gerald's boss, right?
I am, yes.
And then for a period of time as she continues on the case.
Yes.
So she's sort of answering to you and Sergeant Smith for a time?
No, I think she was answering to Sergeant Smith while he was the lead supervisor over the case. Obviously, I'm involved in all the briefings and having input, but she's answering to Sergeant Smith. But as her direct supervisor, there's other areas she would answer to me. in.
Okay. And as her direct supervisor, you're responsible for overseeing her work
Yes,
and making sure she's doing it right?
yes.
And there was no report written for this interrogation.
There was a transcript and a summary of it in a affidavit.
Okay. So do I take it to mean that a transcript and a summary and an affidavit is sufficient in lieu of a report?
Yes,
Okay. And the summary is in that GPS affidavit?
it is, yes.
Okay. Would you agree that it is standard practice at the sheriff's office to write reports after interviews?
It is.
And one reason would be to just document that it was at least done, right?
Yes,
And to provide a summary.
yes.
Okay. And you provided this summary in this affidavit, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, but that was a lengthy affidavit.
Yes, it was.
Okay. And so you're suggesting that whoever wanted a summary of this 5-hour interrogation could just dig through that GPS warrant affidavit and get it that way?
Sure, if you wanted a summary, but again, then we had a transcript and a videotape.
Okay. And the transcript is over 300 pages, right?
That is correct.
Do you agree, and maybe you don't, so tell me what you think, when investigator Habenstreit took this case over in 2011, do you think it would have been nice for him to have readily available to him a few-page report that is standalone, separate from the GPS affidavit, to maybe review the highlights of this interrogation?
Could it be beneficial to him? Yes. It also can become a hindrance. I mean, there's a lot of debate in law enforcement now whether we should do both,
Do both what?
a summary and a transcript, because of possible indiscrepancies.
Okay. So, I see. So some law enforcement think he should have, investigator should have to pour over page after page of superfluous information to get the details.
There can be times where your summary isn't the exact wording, i.e. burial that we just went through,
Sure, yeah.
where the wording might not be exact.
I see. But you would also agree when you're trying to get up to speed on a, investigation that's been pending for years, you might just want a quick snapshot, and then you can go back for some of the details.
Sure, I think that can be beneficial.
And that's why the sheriff's office, although there might be a debate in the law enforcement community, that's why the sheriff's office has standards and policies and procedures about writing reports after interviews.
No, we do not have policy and procedure on writing reports after interviews.
Did you in 2007?
No.
Okay. Now, I know that we already talked about there's being some confusion about if Mr. Jones had stuff upstairs or downstairs, if there was an accident at 10:30 or in the afternoon. But there's something else I want to clarify too that seems a little bit confusing. The information that the sheriff's office received was that Mr. Jones went to the Walmart and bought the track phone on Tuesday, June 26th, right?
That is correct.
And in the interrogation, you kept saying Wednesday.
I did, like an idiot.
Okay, so you had your dates confused there, right?
I did.
So, to be clear, the information is that Mr. Jones gets the track phone on the 26th, right?
Correct, on Tuesday, the 26th.
And then has that meeting with Carol, AKA Gail, on Wednesday, the 27th.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you admit that even though it's important to be prepared for an interrogation and have your information straight, you weren't as prepared for this one in regard to dates as you would have liked.
That is obvious, yes.
Now, when you're talking to Mr. Jones about how he got to work that night, he writes you a map, right?
He did, yes.
Okay. So earlier when we were going over that, it would have been nice to maybe have that map, right? To see the way that he said he went.
Yes.
Where is that map?
I don't know.
Did you lose it?
I don't know who lost it, but it was lost, obviously.
Okay. And that map might have been something nice that Sergeant Beagley to have too, right? When he was driving the routes?
He went all the different ways you can go, but sure, it could have assisted him.
Okay. Now, you discussed the gas can with Mr. Jones,
I did, yes, ma'am.
and that's because that's a pretty important piece of evidence,
It is.
because it could link him to the car fire, right?
It could.
And you discuss it because it's so important. I mean, you discuss it with him quite a bit.
I do, yes.
And you ask him why he would have a gas can.
I do, yes.
And you asked Mr. Jones even if his fingerprints would be on it.
I did, yes.
And if his fingerprints are on it, that would certainly give more evidence, right? That would tie him to the gas can, which could tie him to the fire, right?
It could be one piece, yes.
Okay, one piece. But you didn't collect the gas can?
I personally
Yeah.
did not.
And to your knowledge, nobody at the sheriff's office did?
I was under the impression they did.
Okay. Are you also under the impression that they tested it for the fingerprints?
I don't know.
You don't know, okay. In this interrogation, Mr. Jones talks to you about having OnStar on his Impala, right?
He did, yes.
And OnStar is a tracking device,
It is.
and it has GPS capabilities.
It does.
So as the sergeant of the complex crimes unit, it was your responsibility to make sure that this was a thorough investigation, right?
Yes.
Okay. And, I mean, I understand there's this convoluted piece where you're not the direct sergeant for a while, but eventually you are, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you did this interrogation where you learn about the OnStar, but you didn't follow up with OnStar, right?
I did not personally, no.
Okay. And so you didn't review any records that OnStar might have had at that time back in 2007 about where Mr. Jones's Impala was the week Ms. Bergfeld went missing?
I did not personally.
Okay. So you don't know personally if any OnStar information says whether or not he went to her office on Monday,
I do not.
or where he went on Tuesday,
No, ma'am, I do not.
or where he went on Thursday.
No, ma'am, I do not.
So to be clear, I mean, you're obviously very concerned about what Mr. Jones is doing this week. You have an ability to track him and get tracking records, at least for his Impala, and you don't do that.
I did not do that.
Okay.
Me personally.
Right, you keep saying me personally. To your knowledge, did another investigator?
Was under the impression we had somebody, but I can't say for sure.
Okay. So as the sergeant and the supervisor of the lead investigator in this case, you can't say for sure whether those records were ever gotten?
No, I cannot.
In the interview with Mr. Jones, you told him, quote, it clearly looks as if he is the person based on all the information. Do you remember?
I did tell him that, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And you talked to him about the overwhelming mounting evidence,
I did.
and that there was a huge, huge, huge amount of evidence,
I did say that.
and that it would even continue to build.
I did tell him that.
This was on July 18th of 2007.
I made that statement, yes.
Okay, and you made those statements on
On
July?
July 18th,
Okay.
yes.
And that was 9.5 years ago from now, approximately.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're aware that Mr. Jones was not charged until November of 2014.
I was aware of that.
And that was 7 years after you named him the prime suspect?
Yes.
And over 7 years after you already had overwhelming, mounting, huge, huge, huge evidence?
I'm not sure how to answer that. What's the question?
When he was charged in November of 2014, that was 7 years after this mounting evidence you told him you had against him in 2007.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. I'm still not sure of the question.
Well, you answered it.
Okay.
And you told Mr. Jones that there was going to be physical evidence to present to this jury.
I did tell him that.
And the sheriff's office, maybe you're not aware of this, are you aware that the sheriff's office sent hundreds of items to CBI for processing?
I can only speak to the 2 years that I was in complex crime, so I can't speak to the 7 years of investigation, so I don't know what all was sent and what has returned and what has transpired.
Okay. From your 2 years, are you aware that a lot of evidence was sent in?
Yes,
Okay, and certainly you're aware of what you sent in asking for an expedited processing on July 9th.
I am.
And this was to test for DNA,
Yes,
and it was to test for fingerprints,
On some items, yes.
Some items, okay. And those shoes, those boots of Mr. Jones you collect during the interrogation, that's because you're gonna test those for gas, right?
Gasoline as well as epithelial.
Okay.
Skin tissue.
Yeah, skin tissue. So these are all the different ways that the sheriff's office was hoping to gather physical evidence, right?
We were hoping, yes.
And you told Mr. Jones that one piece of physical evidence will connect him.
Yes.
And I know that, you were really the sergeant for a relatively brief window of time, but to your knowledge, no piece of physical evidence connects Mr. Jones to the death of Ms. Bergfeld.
I can't answer that, ma'am. I don't know.
Okay. Well, the question is, do you know of any?
I don't know. I don't know. I have not reviewed all the evidence pieces.
Okay.
So there could be. I don't know.
Okay. Do you know of any?
I do not know of anything within the 2 years that I was in there.
Okay. And in all fairness, Sergeant Wiler, you've been involved in this case after your 2 years, right?
I was in a different role, yes.
Okay. And you've come to testify a lot about this case.
I have, yes.
Okay. And you've been at briefings, right?
No,
Meetings?
no.
Oh,
Not since I left the unit, no. On surveillance meetings, but not on where the case is at.
I see. So your capacity's been surveillance. Is that a yes?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. And then also coming to testify more recently.
That is correct.
Okay. And so even though you were only sergeant on this case for about a 2-year period of time, you've definitely been around since then.
I have been around, yes.
Don't you think that if there was a piece of physical evidence that connected Mr. Jones to the death of Ms. Bergfeld, you would have heard about it?
Ma'am, it would be supposition on my part. What could be physical evidence to us may be different to you, so I don't know. I really have no idea.
Okay. But I guess what I'm specifically asking you about is any sort of DNA or fingerprints or the skin tissue stuff you talk about.
I can speak to the boots, and that's all I can speak to.
Okay. So you don't know of any of that sort of physical evidence, and you haven't heard of any of it, right?
I do not. I have
It's been
not.
asked and answered at this point.
The objection sustained.
All right. I have nothing else. Thank you.
Mr. Waite, redirect, please. You're welcome.
Good afternoon again, sir.
Good afternoon.
By the time you were doing the second interview on July 18th, you'd actually found out some more information during the course of this investigation.
Yes, I have.
So when Ms. Smith asked you about, the fact that you guys had done the July 5th interview and then you did another interview on July 18th, that was because you found out information about, in particular, a track phone.
Correct. We had seen the video at Walmart and had obtained that evidence.
Okay. And at that point, too, you had more information about escorts. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You had more information about phone numbers because of a list that was found in his toolbox?
Yes, sir, as well as all the other items found on his property.
Okay. Ms. Smith also asked you about how many times you think, I think she put a number on it as 17, how many times you thought that he maintained his innocence. How many times do you think he said during the course of the interview that he either didn't buy the track phone, didn't know about a track phone, or didn't use the track phone?
It was far more than the 17 times. As to how many exact times, I have no idea, but that was a constant denial by him.
Okay. Ms. Smith asked you about him being driven down for the interview. At that point, his vehicles are being searched,
Yes.
and so he didn't really have any other way to get down there.
No, he did not.
So you guys gave him a ride down to the,
Yes.
okay. At the time of this interview on July 18th, you had no idea where Paige Bergfeld's body was?
No idea.
Okay. And in fact, Ms. Smith asked you if it was, took, it took until November of 2014 to charge. It was another almost 5 years before Paige Bergfeld's remains were found. Is that?
That is correct.
When you were talking with Ms. Smith about Sunday night, the defendant had to be reminded, in fact, you had to lead him into a situation where he told you that he'd gone back down to the office, is that, down to his workplace, right?
I found it quite surprising that he admitted to going to his office with Investigator Norcross, and then when I asked him what did he do Sunday, 3 or 4 times, and he keeps nodding no, not knowing anything, and then finally I have to say, you didn't go anywhere else, and then he remembers going to his office and turning off the lights.
And you asked him how long he was there, and he estimated to you he may have been there 30 seconds or so?
Yes, sir.
If Mr. Jones worked at Bob Scott for years, would it be your understanding that he should have been able to easily explain to you how to turn the lights on and off at that location?
Absolutely.
He wasn't really able to do that during the course of the interview?
He did not.
Okay. Now, he didn't know the timing of setting the fire, is that correct?
No, I gave him the time.
Okay, you told him what the time was?
Yes.
Okay. And then you were asking him, and you were asked questions by Ms. Smith about how long it would take, for instance, to go down and turn off the lights and so forth. Is that right?
She asked those questions, yes.
Okay. And there would be a number of factors involved in that, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
For instance, whether you had to retrieve the gas can from Bob Scott RVs or whether you already had the gas can with you, that would have made a difference in how long it took you to go down, set a fire, and go home.
As well as having the gas in the gas can itself. All those variables are involved.
Okay. Ms. Smith asked you a question about whether or not he could have seen a burning car from Bob Scott RVs. You've been in that area. If he was setting a car fire in a car at Walker SMS, wouldn't you agree that he would have a good view of the fire at that point?
He would have a perfect view of it.
Ms. Smith asked you about a conversation you were having with him where it was brought up that you have a tendency to do dumb and crazy things. And can you remember that conversation you had with the defendant?
I do. I was talking about a personal experience that I had had talking about that.
Okay. And what was the purpose of that?
One of the things that I've learned through interviewing is that you have to build rapport as well as you have to build trust. And if you don't build trust, nobody's going to admit to you anything. So I don't, as I said, I don't like to lie to somebody, so I ended up telling them about a personal experience of mine in an effort to build rapport and build trust, and hopefully then he would start to open up to me. He was very closed up throughout the interview, and I could never really get him to open up.
So you were giving him a chance, kind of an out, if you will?
Yes.
Giving him some dignity so he could express something more than what he was telling you?
Yes.
Now, it's your experience as an investigator, whether it's in the context of a divorce or in some other context, you still can't kidnap and threaten somebody to kill them, or kidnap, and the alternative, kidnap and kill somebody.
No, that's very serious, obviously.
So it doesn't matter really what the context is at that point.
It wouldn't, no.
Okay. Now, you were asked about Lisa Nance. Were you aware that Lisa Nance had already separated from the defendant at the time the 2 incidents occurred down in Delta?
I was aware of that.
Okay. Were you also aware that he was no longer living at the house when those 2 incidents occurred down in Delta?
I did know that.
Objection, lack of personal knowledge.
Judge, it's already been testified about, and it was information he was given during the course of the interview.
Ms. Smith?
Your Honor, I don't recall that information being provided by Mr. Jones. Obviously, if it was, then that's...
Do you have a reference for Ms. Smith?
Judge, I don't think I do. I mean, he was asked a number of questions about information he learned outside of the interview as well. As I think about it, I'm not sure he knew about that from the interview, but he was asked questions about what he knew about in preparation for the interview, and I think that's where this information would come from.
The objection sustained, unless you can lay a better foundation. Thank you.
Had you been told information regarding prior incidents with Elisa and Nance?
I had.
How had you been told that information?
We had received reports from Delta County and CCIC, NCIC, and all the background information on him, and so I knew that information from briefings.
Okay, and then you also got that information from a prior interview where Lisa Norcross had some of those same discussions with him.
That is correct.
Okay. So again, were you aware that he was no longer living at the home when those events occurred?
I was aware.
Objection, lack of personal knowledge. Calls for hearsay.
The objection is overruled, given the foundation that's been laid with regard to your questioning about that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
It's not
right?
being offered for the truth of the matter.
So you're not to consider it for the truth of the matter that's asserted, but it's just what what the investigator knew when he spoke to the defendant is what it's to be used for. Thank you.
That's correct, Judge. Thank
Or
you.
what he believed he knew anyway. Thanks.
Now, Sergeant Wiler, you were asked about protocols and so forth down at the sheriff's office, and about protocols regarding an interview like this one. Is that right?
I was asked that, yes.
Okay. Now, there was not only a summary in the form of what you put into an affidavit later on, but there was a recording that we've seen that was 5 hours long,
Yes,
and there was also a 276-page transcript prepared. Is that right?
yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know if I could have just a moment.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Nothing else.
Thank you. Recross whenever you're ready, Ms. Smith. Thank you.
Now, over the course of this 5-hour interrogation, you actually didn't bring up the track phone for about 3 hours, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So, you didn't count how many times Mr. Jones denied buying the track phone, right?
I did not, no.
And, but you do know that you didn't start discussing it with him until, you discussed it with him on and off the last 2 hours, right?
Yes,
And you were asking him from the beginning about his involvement with the disappearance and death of Ms. Bergfeld.
correct, as well as going through day by day what he had done.
Okay. I'm a little, okay, I guess I want to be clear about this, Sergeant. I'll take that. But before I'm clear about that, I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
In terms of, we talked about how you told Mr. Jones he was a person of interest in this case, right?
Yes,
But he'd actually been named as the prime suspect.
yes,
And in terms of putting pressure, he was actually named in the press as a person of interest on July 20th of 2007.
Nope. We, the sheriff's office, didn't name him as a suspect until October, I believe it was.
Okay.
The press may have picked it up, but I don't believe we did.
Okay. Were there other officials involved in this case?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
I mean, if the press referenced officials naming Mr. Jones as a person of interest, wouldn't that be the sheriff's office?
Probably, yes.
Okay. And so you're aware that the press picked that up into July of '07?
I wasn't, but person of interest, I could see that, yes.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
I have page 7906. I have here Sergeant Wiler, page 7906, right?
Okay.
And it's a news article about Mr. Jones being a person of interest in this case, right?
Yes, it is 9 News that talks about officials naming him as a person of interest.
I had one last thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. Mr. Waite asked you about if a person who worked at Bob Scott's a long time should know how to explain to you how to turn the lights off.
Yes,
Did you ask Mr. Jones, how do you turn the lights off at Bob Scott RV?
I did not, no.
Okay. And what Mr. Jones actually told you is that he didn't go to turn the lights off, he went to check the lights.
He did say that, yes.
Okay. I have nothing else, thank you.
Mr. Waite.
Your Honor, nothing based on that.
Okay. Is the witness still under subpoena?
Judge, I think he could be released at this point.
Mr. Colvin?
We have the sergeant under subpoena, we'd ask that he remain under subpoena, but he's free to go.
Okay. You're still under subpoena, but please stay in touch with the lawyers. Thank you. You're free to go at this point. The people's next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Ed Prescott to the stand.
Feel free to stretch. Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. If you could approach, I need to give you an oath before you testify. You have a black court. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you, sir. You can proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Rubenstein. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Can you please tell the jury your full name and spell your last name?
My name is Ed Prescott. It's Prescott.
How are you employed?
I'm an investigator. I'm with Grand Junction Police Department.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
29 years now.
How long have you been with the Grand Junction Police Department?
Since 94.
1994?
Yeah.
In 2007, did you assist, or did the Grand Junction Police Department assist the Mason County Sheriff's Office in some early investigation into the disappearance of Paige Bergfeld?
We did.
Is that common in larger cases to get agency assists?
It is.
Was one of your roles in that to participate in a search warrant that was executed at the home of Lester Ralph Jones?
It was.
What date did that occur?
On the 18th of July, 2007.
Was one of the things that you located during that search a Toshiba laptop computer?
It was.
Do you recall where you located that?
It was in a coat closet just inside the front door, just to the right of the front door of the residence as you came in.
On the floor next to you is a laptop. Do you see that?
I did.
Could you please examine that and tell me what the item evidence number is?
It's People's Exhibit 902, evidence item E as in Edward, T as in Tom, -8.
And did that stand for evidence tech, the person who was collecting it, the ET?
It does.
Okay. Did you collect that item? Did you seize that item at that time?
I did. I turned it over to the evidence tech there.
And that was ultimately sent for processing by investigator Mike Pachota?
As far as I know, I wasn't a part of any further of that
Okay.
involvement in that.
Is that the laptop that you seized from the house?
Yes, sir, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit, I'm sorry, you said
It's 902.
902. Thank you. People's Exhibit 902.
Any objection, Mr. Colvin?
No objection to its admission.
Thank you. People's 902 is admitted.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for Detective Prescott.
Mr. Colvin, cross-examination.
You're welcome to stay up here if you'd like. So this, you're there for the execution of the search warrant, right?
I was, sir.
And because you were doing a search warrant, you knew that nobody had asked for consent or to do this search, or do you know how that part played out?
We were there to execute a search warrant, so I don't know that we needed consent.
Okay,
I wasn't aware of the conversation that went on.
okay. But consent's not an issue if you guys go out and get the search warrant, right?
No, sir, it's not.
And I guess the inverse of that is, you guys wouldn't have to go get a search warrant if somebody would ask for permission and they were granted it, right?
We wouldn't have to, but it depends on the circumstances, because in a case such as this, serious nature case, we would probably have gotten a search warrant anyhow.
Well, one of the reasons you give it a search warrant in a case like this is because it makes it easier for you to get CBI involved, right?
No, not necessarily. So
Well-
that doesn't have any bearing on it. As far as my department, does not have any bearing on that.
Okay, well, you do know CBI participated in the execution of the search warrant.
I believe that's correct.
And you know that when items are booked into evidence, at least through the Madison County Sheriff's Department, the initials of the seizing officer are the ones that go on the item number, right?
No, and it's evidence item ET8 is for the evidence technician. So his initials aren't on that. It's George Barley was the one that collected the evidence there, was the scribe.
You're getting a step ahead of me here, okay?
Okay,
Normally, officer books it in under their initials and the item number. So for example, if investigator Havenstreet introduced something, it'd be JH dash whatever number.
I can't testify to that. In my department, my initials, EP, if this had been in my case, it would be EP, my initials on there. But this is the Mason County Sheriff's Department, so I don't, this is their ballgame.
But in this case, with that item, it's ET for evidence tech. right?
That's correct.
ET, evidence tech, reflects the fact that it's a CBI agency employee, right?
Not necessarily the case. George Barley would have been, typically, when we collect evidence at a location, we have one person that's what we call a scribe. And I would collect an item at the scene, and I would take it to them. And they would be the ones that were responsible at that point to log that item and then put it into evidence. In this case, George Barley was our scribe, and we would, all of us that were at the house as we collected items, would take those items to George Barley, and he would log them, and then he would take them from there and place them into evidence. So I'm not sure what you're,
I guess I'm not sure where our failure to communicate is happening here. You do agree with me CBI was involved in this, right?
they were.
Okay. You do agree with me the execution of the search warrant was a predicate to having CBI come in and do the search, right?
I can't testify to that because I'm not aware that that's the case.
Okay, well, in your experience, does CBI go out and ask people for voluntary consent to do a shakedown of the entire house?
Sir, when I as an investigator conduct a search warrant, even if we did ask for consent, we would still, in this type of case, execute a search warrant or get a search warrant signed by the judge and execute that search warrant. I'm not sure that,
Detective, the question wasn't what you'd normally do in a case like this. And the question wasn't about, in a case like this, do you normally get a search warrant? The question I asked you was, CBI doesn't normally go out and ask for consent to conduct searches. They do searches pursuant to a search warrant. That's your experience, right?
In this case, it was the sheriff's department it was the sheriff's department investigation, so I'm not sure that I can answer your question, sir.
Okay, let me try and put it to you in a different way. The use of CBI to do a search happens when you're doing a search warrant, not just going up and saying, may we have permission to search your house, right?
After a search warrant has been granted, I would assume that would be correct.
Okay.
I can agree with that.
Because CBI is generally not with you guys in your back pocket when you go up and say, hey, can we search this, right? Detective, you don't cruise around with a CBI unit in your
No,
back pocket.
we would request CBI to assist in the search, sir.
Right. And it's easier to request their assistance when you know when the search is going to happen, right?
That would be correct.
Okay. And if you're asking for consent, you don't know if you're going to do the search because you don't know if you got consent yet, right?
That would be correct.
And so search warrants are the key to making it possible to get CBI in to do the search, right?
Okay, I can agree with that.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mr. Rubenstein,
No
redirect.
questions.
Is the witness needed under subpoena or released?
He can be. Oh, yes, we may need him for other issues, Your Honor. We'll just keep in touch with him.
We have them as well. We're asking you.
Okay. You're still under subpoena, sir, so if you'll just stay in touch with the lawyers, but free to go now. Thank you. The people's next witness.
Thank you,
Mr.
Your Honor.
Rubenstein.
The people call Investigator Pete Burg to the stand.
Feel free to stretch if anybody wishes. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, sir. Proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Rubenstein. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, Investigator.
Good afternoon.
For the record, can you please state your full name and spell your last name?
Peter Carlberg, B-U-R-G.
And you are the Peter Carl Burg that previously testified in this case?
Yes.
As part of your responsibilities in this case, did you participate in the execution of a search warrant that occurred at the house of Lester Ralph Jones?
Yes.
As part of that, did you locate a computer?
Yes.
On what date did that search occur?
July 18th, I believe, of 2007.
There's an exhibit in front of you. Can you tell the jury what the exhibit number is, please?
903.
And what is that?
It's a photograph of like an office area that shows a desk and a tower-type computer on that desk.
Do you recognize what that is a photograph of?
Yes.
What is that a photograph of?
It's what I just said. There's a desk, like an office-type area with a desk and then a computer tower on the desk.
That was a poorly asked question, Investigator. Is that a photograph of the computer that you seized?
Yes.
Okay. And that was on July 18, 2007?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 904.
Any objection, Mr. Colburn?
Yes.
Is that the one he's identified? All right, 904 is admitted.
Was that computer ultimately sent to Investigator Pachota for forensic examination?
Yes, it was booked into evidence, and then he would get it out of evidence to examine it.
Thank you. I have no further questions for the witness.
Sorry, can I see the lawyers at the bench? Thanks. Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Your Honor. I inadvertently said Exhibit 904. It's actually 903 was what he identified, so I would at this time ask to withdraw my request to admit 904 and ask to admit 903.
Mr. Colvin.
No objection to both of those.
All right, thank you. 904 is not admitted, but 903 is now admitted. That being the photograph that was identified by the witness. Thank you.
Please take your step, Mr. Reeves.
Mr. Colvin, cross-examination whenever you're ready.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. No worries.
How many people participated in the execution of the search warrant on July 18th at Mr. Jones' house?
I don't know.
There was a whole bunch of folks there. Is that a fair statement?
Depends on your definition of a whole bunch. I would imagine guessing 8.
Okay. My definition means if police are in my house, more than one's a whole bunch.
More than one, definitely.
We
It was
are
probably
way past
around-
that, right?
Yes, less than 100, more than one. I would imagine around 8.
Either way, not a good time, right? Nothing further. Thank you.
Nothing based
Mr.
on that, Your
Rubenstein.
Honor.
Does the witness need to stay under subpoena?
He does.
All right, thank you. You're still under subpoena. Just stay in touch with the lawyers, please. Thank you. The people's next witness, please. Mr. Waite.
Your Honor, I recall Lisa Norcross to the stand.
Thank you. You can feel free to stretch if you wish, as always. Thanks. Good afternoon. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Wade. Thank you.
Your Honor. Welcome back, Investigator Norcross.
Hello?
Are you the same, for the record, are you the same Lisa Norcross that's testified earlier in this trial?
Yes?
As part of your continuing duties of investigation in this case, did you speak with a woman by the name of Tanya Barker?
Yes?
And did that interview happen on August 30th, 2007?
Yes?
At that time, were you and others interviewing a number of people that had been found on a list of escorts that was maintained by the defendant?
Yes?
Okay. And did she, as part of what you asked her that day, were you trying to collect phone numbers that you could match up to the phone records that you had?
Yes?
Did you collect some phone numbers from Ms. Barker as phone numbers that she had used during the course of her adult massage business?
Yes?
Can you tell us what those phone numbers are, please?
To read them exactly, may I refer to my report?
Would that refresh your recollection?
Yes?
Okay. Your Honor, may she refer to that?
Any objection, Mr. Colvin?
Can you direct me to which report that is? Is that the interview with Ms. Barker?
Yes, sir?
I believe it's
Okay.
1031 of discovery.
All right, thank you. That's fine. Thank you for checking.
The numbers she gave were 255-3976, 589-2121, 243-4451, and 201-6970.
Now, Ms. Barker confirmed to you that she had told other investigators that she recognized the person they were asking about as a prior client.
Yes?
Did you confirm that by showing Ms. Barker a photograph?
Yes?
What photograph did you show her?
A photograph of Mr. Jones?
Of Lester Jones, the defendant in this case?
Yes?
Okay. And did she indicate that she recognized him as a prior adult massage client?
Yes?
Okay. Did she indicate how many times she believed she had serviced or provided services for Mr. Jones?
Yes?
How many times did she indicate she believed she had done that?
She thought it was 5 times?
And did she tell you when the last time that she had done that would have been?
She estimated it was May of 2007.
Okay. And did she also refer to another name that she knew Lester Jones by when she was talking to you? Did she indicate what she believed she called him?
I thought, I don't know if it was a name, I thought she told me during their interactions, that she called him Daddy at his request.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Cross-examination, Mr. Colvin.
She indicated she called him daddy at his request?
Yes?
At his request, that seems like an important part of that statement we just made, right?
Yes?
Didn't you include that in your report?
Yes, she said he at his request, called her daddy. It may be worded differently, but yes, she called him daddy. I think that's what he liked or something to that effect.
Okay. When did you interview her?
August 30th of 2007?
Excuse me. It's not you, investigator, I promise. I'm sorry, Judge, can I have a second?
Yes, sir. No worries.
Can we approach, Judge?
Yes, sir. Feel free to stretch if anybody wishes. The objection's overruled.
I have nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Bet.
Mr. Waite.
Nothing based on that, Your Honor. Thank you. And Ms. Norcross can be released at least for now. At least for now. Not from our subpoena.
Okay,
but
you're
certainly
still
for
under
now.
subpoena. Just stay in touch with the lawyers, please. Thank you. The people's next witness, please.
Do people call investigator Mike Machota to the stand?
Feel free to stretch.
And Your Honor, at this time, for the record, we would ask that Ms. Tanya Barker's subpoena be released. We no longer do that.
Do you have an objection, Mr. Colvin?
No.
All right, Ms. Barker is released from her subpoena without objection. Thank you. If you could approach, sir, thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you, sir. If you have a seat in the green chair, please. Thank you. You can begin whenever you're ready, Mr. Rubenstein. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, investigator.
Good afternoon.
Can you please remind the jury of your full name and spell your last name?
It's Mike Piechota, Piechota.
And are you the Mike Piechota who's previously testified in this case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How long have you been in law enforcement?
Since 1992,
And what was your role back then?
I started my career as a probation officer,
And in what state?
Illinois,
When did you move to Colorado?
2000.
Did you immediately start working in law enforcement here?
Yes.
At which agency?
I served 9 months at Criminal Justice Services until I got hired on with the Sheriff's Office.
As part of your role with the Sheriff's Office, or one of your primary roles, since really 2001, have you worked with computers?
Yes.
And when I say work with computers, we all, I guess these days, work with computers, but that was part of your investigative role, was to forensically analyze computers, is that correct?
It's correct.
Can you explain to the jury what sort of background training you have to do that?
I have approximately 650 classroom and laboratory hours in computer forensics as well as cell phone forensics. Since 2006, which was the first year that I started keeping stats, I've done in excess of 525 examinations.
Let's talk about some of your classroom work. In 2001, did you attend a computer crimes conference?
Yes,
And shortly after that, in 2002, did you attend your first conference on a program called NCASE?
yes.
What is NCASE?
It's a software put out by Guidance Software, and it is a forensic program that will acquire and help analyze and examine computers.
After that, did you attend trainings in 2006 related to NCASE as well?
Yes,
What was that? Was that the NCASE Intermediate Analysis and Reporting?
yes,
Okay. And then in 2012 as well?
correct. There's been numerous in-case trainings as well as other trainings on other forensic softwares through the years.
Starting in 2006, it was sort of pretty close to every year you were attending something.
Correct.
Okay. When you do this type of work, is this something that you consult with other people who do similar forensic work?
While working out of my office,
Either out of your office or at conferences?
during trainings, you're in the laboratory with other investigators, and you naturally will ask questions if something isn't clear, just like you would ask an instructor. Back in my office, if I had a question or a concern or something that I didn't know how to interpret, I would reach out to a colleague and talk to them.
Do you have any forensic certifications in this area?
Yes,
What are your certifications?
I have Access Data, which is the competitor in case, Blacklight, and Cellbrite.
Have you previously testified as an expert in the area of computer forensics?
Yes,
Approximately how many times?
I'm speculating between 10 and 15,
And were all of those in Mace County?
all of them.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to qualify Investigator Piechota as an expert in computer forensics.
Do you have an objection, Mr. Colvin?
May I briefly go out here? Just-
Yes, sir.
Very brief.
You don't have a degree in computer science, is that correct?
No, it's in economics.
Your degree is a bachelor's degree in economics, is that correct? You had no previous employment in the field of computers before you were in law enforcement, is that correct?
That is correct.
And your experience in the field of computer forensics is entirely from on-the-job training and training through your employment. In other words, these classes and seminars you attended because of the fact you're employed in law enforcement, is that correct?
Right, I did not go on my own to any of them.
And all the certifications you have received are entirely related to utilizing software that is designed for forensic examinations, is that correct?
Yes.
Judge, I have no further questions. I have no objection.
All right, thank you. I do find the witness is qualified as an expert in computer forensics. He will be allowed to express his opinions in that area. Thank you. You can proceed, Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you. Investigator, did you receive multiple computers in the case involving the disappearance of Paige Bergfeld?
Yes.
In front of you, you will see a photograph that should be marked People's Exhibit 903.
Correct.
Do you recognize what that is a photograph of?
Yes.
Is it a photograph of a computer that you analyzed as part of this case?
Yes.
As well in front of you, there is a laptop computer, and then when I say in front of you, it's on the, I don't know what you call that, desk next to you, yes, with the exhibit sticker 902. You may. You may. Do you recognize that item?
Yes.
What is that?
It is a Toshiba laptop.
Did you also examine as part of your responsibilities for this case?
I did.
Okay. Were those computers collected on July 18th of 2007?
Yes.
When, let's see, you said you use NK software. What does NK software do?
It's a complicated question. Basically, what it does is it's a program that allows you, with other hardware write blockers, to bring in a bit-by-bit copy, if you will, of a hard drive. And it puts it into certain files that you can't change. So I can't change anything in the files that Encase creates. Otherwise, you get a message saying this is no longer a valid image. So it creates an image of the entire hard drive, what's stored, what's in what's called unallocated space, which is just that empty space in your hard drive. It collects everything on the computer. And the program then will, you can run scripts, which are mini programs within the program, if you're looking for certain things like keywords or images. And this program is what brings it all in together for you.
All right, let's back up to the beginning. Walk us through the process. You have computers such as these two computers. What's the first thing you do?
The first thing I will do in this case is I take them out of evidence, bring them to my office. I will then remove their hard drives and do what's called an acquisition. And that is where the standalone forensic computer, which is a special computer, which has write blockers in it, which will prevent any data from going from your computer to this hard drive. Using that, I will acquire the drive. That's where I was talking that bit by bit. And then while the hard drive is out, I will power it on, and I will look at the BIOS to see what the system, the computer thinks the date and time is. And at that point, I'll put the hard drive back in and put it back into evidence.
Okay, so a couple things that I want to explore a little further. You talked about bits, and I've learned everybody's computer knowledge is different. What is a bit?
Computers are basically ones and zeros. And so it collects every single one of those ones and zeros, everything from on that hard drive. So if you've deleted a file, you actually haven't deleted it, you just made it so the computer thinks that that area is an area that can put more data on. So it collects all of that. So if something is in a temporary file, temporary internet file, unallocated space, it actually brings in literally every 1 and 0 from that computer, everything.
And you talked about write blockers. Am I understanding this correctly, that when you hook this up, this system is set up so that nothing can go from your computer to that hard drive, but everything, every exact 1 and 0 from that hard drive, you get a copy of on yours?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then after you do that, you said you disconnected and put that hard drive back?
After I run the BIOS test, I will put the hard drive back in, because otherwise you'd boot it with the hard drive in it, and check the system date and time, then put the hard drive back in, then book it back in.
Prior to booking it back in, do you examine the hash values?
Hash values actually have to do more with when you've acquired the image. So you get the acquired image, and then it brings it into the in-case program formally. And the hash value is a 32-digit long fingerprint, if you will. And the acquisition hash has to match the verification hash. So that confirms that if this is a hard drive and this is my computer, that this hard drive is has given me an exact, perfect ghost image on my computer.
So what if you were to go on a file and hit the space bar? What happens to the hash value?
If you do that on the subject's computer, it would change the hash. If you were to try to, it won't let you, but if somehow you exported out a file and manipulated it, then potentially you can get a different hash. However, the program doesn't allow me to, if I can export files, I can't put them back in then. It just doesn't allow it, thus making it forensically sound.
Okay, so if you have matching hash values, it means that every single 1 and 0 of the entire computer is exactly the same on the two matching hash values?
Correct.
Okay. Then you put it back.
Yes, sir.
All right. So the one that you're examining is the one on your computer, not the actual hard drive?
Right. We don't do the exams on the actual subject drives. We do them on the acquired drives.
When you conduct that sort of examination, do you process everything, or do you only process what you're asked to process?
Typically, you process what you're asked to process. You have everything at your disposal, but you don't necessarily have to look at everything on the computer.
How long would it take you to look at everything on a computer?
If you went line by line, it would take you, depending on the size of the hard drive, of course, it could take you months to a year if you went line by line.
As part of the initial stages of this process, do you determine accounts on a computer?
Are you referring, sir, to like Windows accounts, like user accounts?
Yes, sir. Is that
Ye-
something that you look at?
Yes.
Can you explain how accounts work?
Yes. When either you can do it when you first turn on your computer for the first time ever, or later on, you can create accounts. So let's say you want to have an account for yourself and one for your child. You create their own accounts, and then when you turn the computer on, they've got whatever little picture they want with their name, and then they click on their account, and that opens up their portion of the hard drive.
How does the registered owner play into that analysis?
The registered owner is typically entered when you first turn on a machine for the first time after you bought it. It'll take you through, like, you set up the time zone you're in, you set up a variety of things. One of the things it'll ask you is your name, the computer name. If you work for a company, you can put your company name in there. That's where it's going to draw that data from.
When you examined these two computers, the laptop and the Dell Tower, did they have user accounts on them?
Yes.
Can you explain what user accounts were on each?
On the tower, the Dell Tower depicted in the photograph, there were 2 that were user ones. And that's one for Mr. and one for Mrs. Jones.
When you did your examination, did the name Lester Jones actually show up in the string?
Yes.
Can you explain what a string is and how these accounts play into that?
Well, in this particular case, it just said the name either Ralph or Lester Jones under the little icon for his logon. And then when you do that, then in the system, when you look at a file, it tells you what account you're under for that file, so that when you're doing these searches, you could tell whose account you are in.
How about the laptop?
There was 1 user account, and that's for Lester Jones.
Okay. So are accounts always locked with a password?
No.
Do you know if the accounts in this case on the tower were locked with a password?
That I don't know, because the forensic programs allow me to bypass all of that. So unless I specifically look, I don't know if it had a password protection.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you right, and correct me if this is wrong, you can tell if somebody was logged in under a specific user account to access a file by looking at the string.
Yes.
But what you can't tell is whether or not you would have had to have, or what you didn't look for is whether or not you would have had to have a password to get that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Can you explain permissions and files that are accessed by both accounts?
Permissions are assigned by each file, and it's a way Windows will allow you to write, delete, modify files, depending on your permissions. So if you're, let's say, an administrator on this computer, you have more abilities to access more files than if you were just a user on it, because then you don't have as much access to change system files. So permissions are assigned by how you set up the computer, if you're an administrator or if you're a user. And that's what the permissions do. And then each file you can look at and you can see who has what permissions on that file. So, for example, I could have it where I'm the administrator and I have my permission number, it's a SID number, is, let's say, 0001, and I can modify that file, but my son is 002 and he can't modify it. So you can see all that when you go through the forensic program.
Okay, let's talk about your analysis of these computers. On October 1st of 2007, did you conduct a forensic examination of the computers?
That is when I finished the examination.
Explain that process.
In this particular case, I started the actual examination looking through the data on the 14th of August of 2007, and I concluded with the final report that's dated October 1st, 2007.
As part of that, were you given an assignment as to what it is you were looking for?
Yes.
What were you looking for? What were you told to look for?
Any links between Lester and Page.
Did you do a keyword search in order to find links?
Yes.
Which computers did you do that on?
I ran the same keyword search against both computers.
Judge, if I can have just a moment, my computer's...
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that, sir. Okay, so when you did that, did you look for the word page?
Correct.
And that's page, P-A-I-G-E, not page as in a piece of paper.
Right.
Correct?
Ms. Bergfeld.
And did you find a hit for that anywhere on the computer?
There were There were 2 hits for Miss Bergfeld's first name of Page.
Did you examine those 2 hits?
Yes,
Were both of them or either of them related to Miss Bergfeld?
1,
Okay. One was totally unrelated
correct.
and one was related. May I approach, Your
Yes.
Honor?
Yes, sir.
I'm handing you what's marked People's Exhibit 905. And I've previously shown this to defense counsel.
Thank you.
Do you recognize that item, sir?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This is the keyword hit for the word page and what it brought me to.
Which computer was this on?
This is on the Dell Tower.
Okay. And what does this relate to? What is on this piece of paper?
There is a photograph of 2 of our deputies in a picture looking at a red Ford Focus that was on fire.
And were you able to determine from your view of this file as to where this picture came from?
Yes,
Where did this picture come from?
Walker SMS.
I'm sorry, what was the source of the photograph? The source of the website that had this?
The Grand Junction Daily Sentinel.
Okay, and this was found on the Dell Tower that you just testified you examined?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 905.
Any objection?
No, sir.
905 is admitted.
Your Honor, I'd ask to publish it at this time.
Any objection, Mr. Colburn?
No, sir.
You
Oh,
can
I'm
proceed.
sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Colvin, thank you.
Oh.
This is going to appear behind you, investigator. I'm going to ask you to explain some terms that exist on here. Is that Exhibit 905?
That's what I'm looking at, yes.
Ms. Watson, can I have you zoom in on that? Is that something you're able to do? Okay. Okay, investigator. Let's talk about the words up top. It says Lester Jones / Dell Tower / D / goes on for a while. What is that?
That is the string showing me where this particular file is stored on the computer.
Is any part of that string created by you?
Yes,
Which part?
the first 2. I create a case name, in this case Lester Jones, and then I type in which computer so that I would know later, and that's where you see Dell Tower. And then from D on would be for the computer.
Okay, so the computer puts into folders in different places items and names them, is that right?
Correct.
And so everything after Dell Tower, the computer assigned, is that assigned automatically by a computer?
Yes, in this case, yes.
Is it possible to create and assign your own strings like this?
Yes, you can save your files any way you want. Let's say a Word document, I can save it anywhere and control that string.
But these were files that were just automatically created by the computer?
These were correct.
Okay. On here as well, to the right of the photograph, just below it, it says file created, last written, and last accessed. Let's start with file created. What does that term mean?
What those are is every file that you get out of a computer is going to give you certain attributes. Those attributes in this case are these dates and times. In this particular case, what's important, because if you see along the top, it says temporary internet files. So the dates and times are all going to be exactly the same. And what's important is the very first one. The very first one that says date created of July 2nd of 2007 at 21:10 hours. That was the date that this file, and the file name is above, was first on this machine.
What is last written?
Because this is a temporary internet file, they're all going to be the same.
Okay, if this was not a temporary internet file, when would file created and last written be different?
Let's say I create a Word document today, and tomorrow I change it. You're going to have a different date.
Okay, and then last accessed?
That is the last time I opened it, but didn't do anything to it.
Okay. And then finally on there, it says, the caption for this photograph read, now who put in that?
I did.
Okay, and you say the caption for this photograph read, quote, photo by Dean Humphrey, Mason County Sheriff's Deputies guard Paige Burgfell's burnt out car near 23 and G Roads. The woman has been missing since Thursday. So did you gather that information off of the computer? That was a caption that was associated with this photograph on the computer?
Yes.
Okay, so other than you putting this caption for this photograph read, is everything else just copied and pasted straight over?
It's a copy paste.
Okay, now, July 2nd, this, you know from the investigation, because you testified earlier, you processed the car on July 2nd. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, as part of your forensic responsibilities in this case, did you search a date range to see if the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel was accessed by this computer during other times?
I did conduct a date range for the Daily Sentinel.
And was that date range from June 20th, 2007 to July 15th of 2007?
Yes, it was.
How many times was the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel accessed between those dates?
Once.
This?
This is the one time.
Okay. Judge, I'm about to move on to a whole other topic of a different search, so this is probably a good time to stop for the evening.
Okay, thank you. We'll resume at 9 o'clock in the morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a good evening. Please remember the instructions with regard to avoiding all media coverage and don't do any other investigation on your own, etc. And we'll see you back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Please rise for our jury. For the record, our jury's left the courtroom. Anything else, Mr. Rubenstein?
So if I can just retrieve the admitted exhibits for the court.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Colvin. Thank you. We're in recess until 9 o'clock in the morning.